Dr. Abbasi, thank you for sparing time to talk to Chinese readers and researchers. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on your well-deserved appointment as editor-in-chief of the BMJ. Now, may I ask a few questions of interest to my Chinese colleagues? Last year was the 180th anniversary of the BMJ, still one of the world's top medical journals. What major contributions do you think the BMJ has made in those 180 years? And how does the BMJ differ from other medical journals in its vision, mission, values, and areas of focus? Thank you.
Professor Tang, thank you very much. And first of all, I'm delighted to be joining you and talking to readers and authors in China. It's a real honor and privilege to be able to do so. Now, believe it or not, I have not been at the BMJ for 180 years, but I have been involved for the last 25. So perhaps I can best talk about what we've achieved in the last 25 years. I mean, of course, the BMJ is one of the oldest scientific medical journals in the world, and we're very proud of that. And its tradition started as a campaigning journal, campaigning for the poor, campaigning on social issues. And it became a very, very strongly clinical journal. So our identity has always been, yes, to think about populations, yes, to think about better health for people generally, but specifically to focus on supporting and helping clinicians and public health people, both one and the same, deliver better care to patients and populations. And when I started at the BMJ back in 1997, it's quite a while ago now, what I was taught then was that when we decide on papers, what we're thinking about at the BMJ is a doctor or a public health person or another health professional making a decision that will affect a patient. So we should be deciding to publish those papers that will help people make those decisions. And that thinking became better defined. So that was when Richard Smith was the editor at that time. Then the previous editor, Fiona Godley, she focused that a little more into saying that we're about helping people make better decisions, which I think is very important. So if you say, what are we about? That's what we're about, and that's our focus. And I think that puts us in the very clinical and practical end of health and of healthcare and delivering healthcare and improving people's health. Now, in those 25 years, the BMJ has been at the forefront of many, many things. First of all, we were the leading journal associated with the evidence-based medicine movement. So ever since evidence-based medicine in the 80s and 90s started emerging as a real force, the BMJ was very, very closely involved and very supportive of improving how we do research, improving how we publish research, improving methodologies. And so I would say that's an achievement that the BMJ has been very much a part of in the last 25 years, is establishing and disseminating and furthering and promoting better evidence and better research and better publication practices and policies around clinical research and evidence. So that's number one. Number two, since that time, we've always campaigned and championed openness and transparency around publication and around research. So people declaring competing interests, people saying who did what on a study, championing open peer review, championing publication of all the decision making and the comments that relate to a paper after it's been published. So opening up the medical scientific process for scrutiny, because we do not believe that publication is the end of the story. It's an ongoing part of the scientific debate and discussion. And what we want to do is say, here, we published this paper, we're doing it as openly as possible. These are these are the authors, these are their competing interests, this is what the peer reviewer said, this is what we said about this paper. Now we'd like you as the community, the scientific community, to scrutinize this science and say where it might be improved, where it might be highly relevant, and how we then build from that. And the next step of that is campaigning around open data and people making data available, the participant level data, when they publish their work. So number one is being very much associated with evidence-based medicine. Number two is championing and promoting openness, transparency in research and in medical journals. The third area where we've taken a very much a leading role is patient involvement, and we've championed the role of patients in healthcare decision making, of working with patients, of co-production of healthcare, because we believe that's a better way of improving people's health. And we've institutionalized that at the BMJ because we have several patient editors. We ask reviewers who are patients to assess the submissions that we receive. We get commentaries from patients, we get articles from patients. So we're trying very much to live what we preach, in the sense that we're saying that healthcare is co-production, is working in partnership, and we try to do that as well at the BMJ. So I would say in those three areas, we've been taking a very strong leading role amongst medical journals. That's a difference for us, but also we have a very strong team of journalists at the BMJ. I think we, amongst the leading medical journals, we have news, we have features, we have investigations, we have opinion pieces, and that sets us apart from the other journals. So I think the range of things that we cover, and then increasingly multimedia, means that that gives us a particular identity. And we're always open to questioning authority, to challenging, to supporting patients and clinicians, and that is the essence of the BMJ.
Thank you very much. I've been reading the BMJ and also publishing the BMJ in the past 30 years or so, but it's really good to hear from someone, the insider stories from someone who has been working for the BMJ for over 25 years. So another question. The BMJ publishes a wide range of articles. Could you share with us what types of articles published in the BMJ represent the journal's character and values, and are particularly worth reading by Chinese readers?
Yeah, so I mean, you asked me about values. I better explain what our values are, and they build from the way I answered my previous question. So I'll give you 4 of our values at the BMJ. Number 1 is to be evidence-based. Number 2 is to be open and transparent. Number 3 is to be patient-centered. And you can see they're the areas that we've really led on, as I was explaining previously. And the 4th one is to be courageous in how we go about doing things. So they are our values. They are part of everything that we do. So every single piece of content that we publish at the BMJ should really live those values that I've just explained to you. So you should not see more of those values in any one particular place in the BMJ. You should see them everywhere. We do publish, as I began to mention also, a very wide variety of content. So we have traditional research, we have clinical education articles, we have scholarly analysis articles and editorials, and also, as I say, we have journalism. So we have 4 distinct areas that we publish, of types of articles that we publish. I'd like to think that all of them embody the values of the BMJ, and that is certainly our intention. But when I'm saying what would most interest readers in China, of course, I'm aware that there's a very strong interest in China in 2 particular areas. Of course, research and the development of research and how it's how it's evolving. And also in health policy, I know there is a very strong interest in how we deliver healthcare and achieve universal health coverage, especially for a large population. So I would say there are two particular areas that I would encourage readers from China. Certainly look at our research papers, because I believe they are some of the strongest research papers in terms of the methodology, in terms of the quality that you will find anywhere. They are very relevant to clinical practice and to policy making. So that's one area. But I'd also urge readers in China to, if you're able to engage with our our scholarly pieces, which are analysis and editorials. And no, we published 10 scholarly pieces about China's response to the pandemic only a few months ago. And I think these pieces are very instructive. Often they are written by international experts. They take a very global view. And I think there's lots there of relevance for people in China. So, for example, we published the 10 papers from China, but around the same time, we also published about the same number of papers from the independent panel for preparedness and response in relation to COVID. That's the WHO panel. And I think those papers would be very relevant to every country trying to respond to COVID. So that's just one example, but I think there's lots in our scholarly content for readers from China, and I hope you are able to engage with it.
Thank you. That's a very good guide for our readers. My next question is for our researchers. Can you share with the Chinese researchers what papers the BMJ would most like to publish regarding, for example, research questions, study design, methodological quality, research ethics, conflict of interest, and so on? And what contributions you think Chinese researchers can particularly contribute? Thank you.
So, I mean, I think China has a great deal to contribute to the broader research enterprise, to furthering medical science, and I think China is already doing so, and the potential to do so even more in the future is very, very great. If you're looking to try and get published in the BMJ, I mean, every paper we take on an individual case, so there's a very complex answer to each particular question and every single paper, but I'll try to give you a kind of a general answer in how we approach things when it comes to research papers. So the way we like to look at a research paper, number one, is to focus on the research question. And we like to think that the research question should be relevant, should be important, should be as original as possible, likely to have an impact, as I say, on patient care, on policy making. And that's the first thing that we're deciding. And so I think when you're thinking about the BMJ for a paper, think, is my paper going to help a clinician? Is it going to help a policymaker make a particular decision that will influence the health of an individual or the health of a population? So that's the first thing to think about. And we think about that a lot, and we make most of a large part of our decision about whether we want to publish a paper or not on that very specific point around the research question. Then the second issue is to try to make sure that the methodology is appropriate, the research methods are appropriate for the research question that has been asked. And so we then think about that very deeply. And then we also, then of course, if the methods are the right methods to answer the question that we believe is interesting, important, and original, then we scrutinize the methods in greater detail. So we're more interested actually in the questions that are being asked, the research questions that are being asked, than the answers. Because if you follow the logic of this, if you ask an interesting and important question about clinical care or about policy making, and you answer that question with the best possible methods that are available to you, then the answer that you get should still be of interest. So that's what we're thinking about as we're making the decision. Now, of course, every paper has a different question, then we scrutinize the methods very carefully. So if it's a systematic review, randomized control trial, observational study, the usual kind of papers that we publish, we will look at each one very carefully depending on the specific methods that have been used. But what I would advise people is that we do have probably one of the most sophisticated peer review processes of any journal, where papers get a very, very great deal of scrutiny. So if you're thinking of sending your paper to the BMJ, I would make sure that you sent it to colleagues and clinicians and policymakers and see if they think, this is relevant to me, this would help me in my practice, but also make sure that you have a statistician involved in the analysis of your study. The statistician should be involved right from the beginning of the study, of course, but make sure that you have that input, because we do offer and provide a very high degree of statistical input to the papers that we want to publish. The other advice I would give is that we like openness and transparency, as I've explained previously. And so we want you to declare your funding. We want you to be very open about who did what and who contributed in which way on the paper. We want a statement that the authors were in control of the data and the decision to publish the paper. So the integrity of the paper and the openness and transparency around the research matters a great deal to us. So I hope I've helped answer that question. It's a hard one to answer because the response to any single paper is different. But I think that they're just the broad issues that we're looking at. And overall, also, we're a journal, we're an international journal. So remember that our focus is to try to publish papers that will have an influence internationally to as many readers and clinicians and policymakers as possible around the world.
Thank you. I think our Chinese colleagues will be very pleased to hear the tips from the editor-in-chief of the BMJ. My next question is a general issue about clinical research. For historical reasons, the UK is much stronger currently, and also in the past, than China in clinical research. But China must strengthen its clinical research so as to make a strong and balanced biomedical research system. What experiences and lessons do you think we can learn from the UK regarding, for example, culture, education and training, financial support, rewarding mechanisms, and so on? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a very complex question, Professor Tang. I'll try to answer it as briefly as possible. I mean, I'm not sure the UK is so. I mean, you say it's ahead of China. I'm not sure that's the case. We have our own problems in the UK. I mean, I think everywhere, not just in the UK or China, but in every country. If we're to look at clinical research, it does not get the same funding as basic science research does. And that's just as true for the UK as I guess it is for China. And there are many complicated reasons for that. And many of them are to do with academic reward, as we know. So we're fighting the same battle in the UK to try to strengthen clinical research. And it's very important. And if you look at where the BMJ sits amongst all the other journals, we're very much at the clinical research and the policy end of the spectrum of research and what we publish. So I think the UK also has some difficulties. We're trying to overcome them, and the best way to overcome them is to make sure that funding bodies are thinking openly enough to fund clinical research and not just ignore it and focus solely on basic science, for example. And a lot of the papers we see from China, in fact, are are more at the basic science end of the spectrum than they are at the clinical end of the spectrum. So I think, if China is to advance in clinical research, it requires a higher level focus of saying we're going to fund clinical research, we're going to encourage clinical research, we're going to have clear policies that our research infrastructure is going to support clinical research. And the interesting thing about China is that China has immense power and potential to become, the leading country in clinical research. I think it's well on the way to doing so already. You have the infrastructure, you have many dedicated people who are willing to work on the research, who want to get their research shared and published. But also I think China has a numbers advantage when it comes to recruiting patients into trials, into studies, because of the very large numbers in the population. I think China can be a real powerhouse for clinical research, and I don't see it being that far off the UK. In fact, I don't know. No, I'm not sure. I'm in agreement that the UK is ahead. Perhaps you could explain to me why you think that is. But certainly, I think give it 10 years, and there'll be no question around that whatsoever. I think China has immense potential in this area. It's really whether or not people are open to understanding the importance of clinical research, and then they receive the backing and the funding to go away and conduct that research. So I think what you said was right. It's really, you asked about culture. I think it is a change of culture that accepts that this kind of research is important. And we argue it is important because there are a number of findings that are shown through early research that when you then go and test those products, drugs, interventions, those approaches in a clinical setting, they don't work or they don't work to the same degree as you expected. So clinical research is very important because ultimately that's what we're doing to patients and that's what we're doing to our populations. And if we're serious about creating a healthier world, about improving people's outcomes related to health and well-being, then clinical research and public health research will be very important to any national research infrastructure.
Thank you. We might have similar problems, but you probably know that in China, we have a national foundation for natural research, basically which supports mainly laboratory research, basic medical science research, and other types of basic research. And there aren't any resources, or in particular, national level foundations to support clinical research. That's probably one of the major problems we have at the moment. And those who are interested in doing clinical research, but they can't find sufficient resources to support that research.
Yeah, I think yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, the UK, I guess, in that sense, we would say is ahead in the sense that there are national bodies that are willing to support and fund clinical research, not to the same extent that lab research or basic science research is funded, but there are organized national structures to support clinical research, and I think people recognize the importance of it. So I think that's the battle we need to win in China, and we'd like to help you with that conversation.
You must know, many of the research methods, in clinical research actually start from the UK, like randomized controlled trials. The BMJ published the very first randomized controlled trial. So that's why I said, in the question that the UK is stronger in resources made available, and also in methodology and also culture.
Yeah.
So we are catching up.
Yeah, sure. I think in that aspect, I think you're absolutely right. I think the tradition of investing in and thinking about clinical research and better methodologies, I think that's been ingrained for for the evidence-based medicine as it took off in the 80s and 70s. Of course, we'd had the first randomized control trial published in the BMJ decades before that. So yes, so I think the thinking, the planning, the practice of clinical trials in particular, originated very much in the UK, but of course now it's an international enterprise, and we can't claim that the UK does it better than other places anymore. Although, having said that, during COVID we did have a number of very good trials assessing treatments for COVID. So perhaps the UK has found a way of being prominent again in the clinical trial landscape.
But you don't have to be very modest about what UK has done. UK has done a lot in clinical research.
Well, yeah, you could say that. Yeah, it's better for you to say that. Thank you.
Okay. The world has changed quite a lot since the BMJ published the very first randomized controlled trial. And now we have the internet, we have computers, we have huge amount of social media. So in the new world like this, what is the role you think of the traditional media like the BMJ in health and medicine in particular? And how can traditional and fast growing media complement each other?
Yeah, I'd like to think we're traditional and fast growing, Professor Tang. So I think we're both. And let me explain to you why we're both, because if we just think about methodologies, as we've been discussing, the BMJ is very much a place that's been associated with clinical trials, with randomized controlled trials, with systematic reviews and meta-analyses, very much over past decades, and high quality observational studies. And that will not change, will continue to do so. Because there are very high levels of evidence, and we want to publish papers using those methodologies. But the world is changing in the ways that you've described, with machine learning, with artificial intelligence, with real world data, with large data sets. So as well as being a supporter of the traditional, shall we say, methodologies, the BMJ is also open to different kinds of methodologies. And we understand the importance of these new data sources, of these new ways of analyzing information, of these new methodologies. And I want us to be in a leading position in terms of setting the standards, leading the thinking, supporting, publishing papers that are based on these new methodologies, because they're very, very important, they're very relevant to the world we live in today, and they are increasingly important. So I think the way I'd like to answer your question is to say, yes, there's a traditional part of the BMJ, but we're also modern, new, dynamic, radical. We will be embracing these new methods because they are the methods that are speaking directly to politicians, to decision makers, to clinical decision makers, and to our populations.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear that. And I personally also believe, the traditional journals like the BMJ can and should also play a very important role in providing reliable sources of information, both for the public and the decision makers, in addition to traditionally to doctors. This discussion like this, I guess is inevitable. We have to talk, about the COVID-19. During the past 2 years, China and the UK actually adopted very different strategies to address the COVID-19 pandemic. Very different. What lessons do you think humanity as a whole has learned from both countries' experiences and lessons? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. In fact, as I mentioned previously, we published 10 papers, which you and I were both involved in, Professor Tang, about China's response to COVID-19 and what the world can learn from it. I think and that was full of some very important themes. But I think the theme that came out most strongly, and I know that you care very deeply about, is that it showed the ongoing importance of traditional public health, and or old school public health, and how important it is in helping minimizing the harm to health and well-being from a pandemic. And I think without a shadow of a doubt, China managed to implement and organize those old school public health policies far better than many other places, including the UK. And I mean, the metrics people look at, of course, ultimately are how many people died and how the economy was affected. And you can, I mean, the facts are there for everybody to see. So I think the main lesson to emerge from the pandemic is this reaffirmation that despite all the modern technology and the modeling and the modern ways of doing things and treatments and new approaches that people might be proposing or hypothesizing about, that traditional old school public health still has a very important place when we're in this kind of situation. I think the other message that came out very strongly during the pandemic is the role of inequalities and equity, and how we must protect and do better for vulnerable populations and support vulnerable populations, because the countries that were able to better support vulnerable populations and not be as affected by inequalities in terms of how the pandemic played out, I think they had better outcomes as a result of that. So to me, they are the two strongest themes that have emerged from the pandemic. There are many, many lessons to learn. We, as I say, we had those 10 papers which were saying these are the lessons for the world to learn from China. We will also be looking at the UK over the next few months. We're in the process of doing that. We're looking at the UK. So what can the UK learn from the way it handled the pandemic over the last 2 years? I think there is a lot to learn, and it's important that we do learn those lessons. But some of those lessons, I mean, I think were perhaps didn't need to be learned, and if they did need to be learned, they could have been learned much, much earlier.
Thank you. You mentioned the collections we did a while ago, but you probably will be delighted to know that and that collection was selected as #1 of the top 10 medical science news by the Health Daily, the Chinese, the #1 newspaper on health and medicine in China. You probably, will be happy to know that.
Oh, great! That's no, I didn't know. I am happy to. Can I tell you why I'm happy to know that? Because I'm happy to know that. Because I mean, you might say, well, why is the BMJ doing anything in China? Okay, we want to do more for China, with China, because we want to create a healthier world. And China is a very important country because of its large population, but also because of its influence in the world to achieving that goal. And we want to help to publish articles that will help, first of all, improve policy making and decision making in China, to support your thinking and giving it that international outlet so those issues can be discussed. We want to help support the research capacity and the research infrastructure in China, and all of those things are really focused around improving, as I say, the outcomes related to health and well-being for the population. So I think the world has a lot to learn from what China is doing, and the pandemic response is just one of those examples. And I think they were a very good and important set of papers, and I'm delighted that they had the recognition that you just told me about. That's very good news. Well done to you, because you did a lot of the work on them.
Thank you. The research actually is constitutes the main part of the papers published in the BMJ. Let's move back a bit and talk a little bit more about research. And today, there are new methods and new ways of doing research. Obviously, a huge amount, for example, of routine medical data are becoming available for and new analytical tools such as artificial intelligence are being applied to clinical research. What opportunities does this offer? What, if any, pitfalls should we be aware of? And what advice would you give to Chinese researchers about these? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, again, the questions you're asking require a 3-hour answer, Professor Tang, but I'll try to do it in a few seconds. I think the simple thing to say is that I believe these new methodologies have immense potential. I think they can be very helpful, very supportive, help us with information that we wouldn't otherwise get, that will support decision making. It might be surveillance in relation to infectious diseases, early warning systems. It might be early to know more about the impact of interventions on populations. It may tell us more about just monitoring and being aware of health trends. So that there is great power, and also there's a power in perhaps being able to understand how interventions are affecting the population much more quickly and in a different way to the information that we get from clinical trials and systematic reviews. So I think the power of these new technologies is immense and is revolutionary, but we have to engage with it. The reason we have to engage with it is, and we can't just leave it to the technology companies, is that there's also a great risk of harm. And the harm can come through the way people's data is handled or the confidentiality of information. Just two examples, or how the information that's produced by those analyses is used. So there are many, many dangers, and we need to be aware of them. And I think this is where the medical journals do have a role to play, simply because we have a tradition of promoting the best research ethics, promoting research integrity, and we need to make sure those things are central to the use of these new technologies. So there is much to be gained, but also there are many potential risks. If I would say, give advice to researchers in China, I'd say, yes, we're open to this new kind of methodology, this new kind of thinking, these new methods, but we will be paying very, very close attention to how you've handled people's data, what permissions you have to use their information, and how you have dealt with the confidentiality issues around those data, because people are increasingly aware of that their data can be used in different ways, but also how it can be misused, and people don't want it misused. So obviously in some countries there's more awareness and strong feeling about this than others, but certainly in many countries in Europe and the USA, for example, people do not want their data to be used without their permission, and they're very careful about how it might be handled, and this is a very politically sensitive issue.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear from you both the enthusiasms and also cautions. There's an English saying, every coin has two sides. I'm sure this wisdom would also apply to new technology and new ways of research.
Thank you for that. I think the emerging knowledge that we're gaining about these new methodologies is that, and I think the evidence, as I say, is emerging on how we best apply them, is that just having a fully automated system is not the answer. I think I think the emerging thing is that you do need human involvement in those analyses, in making sense of the information, because that makes it better quality, makes it richer, but also helps you think about some of the harms that I've just spoken about.
I totally agree. science can also be used for different purposes, not only for research.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so given the time we have, we have to move on. Here comes my last question. I'm sure you are very well prepared. And during the editorship of Dr. Fiona Gottlieb, your predecessor, the BMJ has established its clear leadership in evidence-based medicine, as you mentioned, preventing overdiagnosis and overtreatment, research integrity, and patients' partnership, and so on. As the new editor-in-chief, are you planning changing or new initiatives for the BMJ? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good question because, yeah, as I say, I've been involved with the BMJ for a long time. So I know I've been part of many of those initiatives that you're talking about. I mean, let me answer this question in this way. What will not change, first of all, let me tell you what will not change. What will not change is our dedication to our values. So we will be evidence-based, patient-centered, open and transparent, and courageous in what we do at the BMJ. That will not change. That is my promise to you, Professor Tang, and to all who are interested in China to hear what we will be doing. What will not change is that we will continue to work and strive for a healthier world, and that means healthier population and healthier planet. But there is some areas of focus, that I'm going to be very much building towards. And let me tell you what they are. And I've been mentioning them during our interview today. To me, a healthier world means a world that, and this is the key to it, that prioritizes outcomes related to health and well-being. And I think we can all honestly say that our world today does not do that. And although it sounds like a simple thing to do, and I'm not the first person to make this argument. I mean, others have made it previously, for example, arguing for health in all policies. What we do know is that our attempts so far to prioritize outcomes related to health and well-being have not been particularly successful. And my view is that it's different in different countries, but I'm taking a general view. My view is that if we are to create a better world, if we are to create a healthier population, if we are to create and save a healthier planet and save the planet, we have to prioritize those outcomes that make sure that the health and the well-being of the planet and its people are improved. So if we accept that logic, then what we understand also is that the health sector is only responsible for a small part of people's health and well-being outcomes. And so I think as a medical journal in the modern world, striving to create a better world, we need to also be thinking about how education interacts with health, how housing interacts with health, how transport interacts with health, how inequalities interact with health, how people's social status interacts with health, etc., etc. And so we need to think of health as being central. I mean, as a medical journal, we make that argument without any doubt and unashamedly, and see how all the other sectors interact with health and see how we can contribute to advancing that thinking, working together with colleagues in other areas on initiatives that will improve the health and well-being of our populations. Also, I think if we do that, that means we are open-minded to the type of methods and the approaches that we will consider, because although randomized controlled trials and systematic reviews are very advanced in health research, in medical research, in some of the other sectors, there may be other forms of evidence, and we've been talking about them just now, that are emerging that we need to take seriously. So I think there's a a greater definition about what we're going to be doing, and those things are part of the agenda. And also there's a recognition that if we are to improve the health and well-being of our populations, then it's not only doctors that deliver care, there are other health professionals, wider members of the team that are also delivering care. And so we need to be providing information that helps people delivering care, whoever they are, wherever they are. And we will be building on our international efforts as well to support clinicians, health professionals, policymakers all around the world. So it's overall and underlying everything, we are what we are. We are the BMJ. I think, there's an essence of BMJ that I've tried to explain to you. But my, my editorship will be about arguing for what I've just described to you, which is the prioritization of health and well-being outcomes globally, in society, in arenas that that argument needs to be made. And to me, that is the way of creating a better world and a healthier world and a healthier planet.
Thank you. Actually, I totally agree with you.
That's good to hear.
Given resources and time, are always limited. We must set priorities. Second, we need to appreciate more. The health is determined by or affected by many more factors beyond medicine and public health. So I totally agree. I do look forward to a better BMJ under your leadership, and we all look forward to a better and a healthier world. Thank you so much, Dr. Abbasi.
Thank you, Professor Tang. Can I make one more? Can I make one more comment, which is to say, I mean, I'm very fortunate, okay, because I've worked with two great editors of the BMJ. When I started, I worked with Richard Smith, and then more recently, I worked with Fiona Godley, and they really established the BMJ as a leading voice, as a leading thinker, as a leading international journal in not just evidence, not just in research, but also in medical journalism, but very much being at the heart of the international debate on science and medical science and evidence related to it. I'm really standing on the shoulders of giants here and building on what they achieved. And that's all any of us can hope to do. We have a great opportunity now, but we also have a great responsibility, and the responsibility is to people all around the world, because these are very difficult times, and our responsibility is to do the right thing in terms of providing evidence that's trustworthy, of supporting clinical practice with helpful and informative information through our clinical articles, but also making people aware about the debates and the issues that are around in the world of science and medicine, and pushing forward the agendas that will lead to a healthier world and better outcomes for people, health-related outcomes for people around the world and for the planet.
Thank you so much. I think this probably will bring us to the end of our conversation. Finally, I would like to thank you so much for sharing with us your experience and wisdom. They are all greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Professor Tang, thank you very much, and look forward to working more and more with colleagues in China. Thank you.
Thank you.